Welcome to the Bitcoin LatAm report. Today I have the chance to interview Gabriel Amorocho. We met for the first time a few months ago at the Adopting Bitcoin conference in El Salvador, and now we're doing an interview. So thank you, Gabriel, for joining. And thank you. I'm excited.
Thank you, Maciek. Very excited also. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, so every podcast like this starts with simple introductions for the people that don't know you. So if you can give a little bit of history about your background, where you're from, and why are you a Bitcoiner now?
Okay, yes. I'm connected from Cali, Colombia. I am a native Colombian from Cali. I've been in Bitcoin for about 11 years so far. Currently, I'm a Bitcoin mentor, educator, and also entrepreneur.
That's great. If somebody reviews your LinkedIn profile, you have quite a lot of experience in the corporate world working for banks. Did that influence in any way, like your vision about Bitcoin and why you became a Bitcoiner? Like, when was the moment where you said, like, okay, this is enough. I want to orange pill people now. And just curious if you have anything to share in regards of that.
Yes, Maciek. In fact, you did pinned down correctly. I worked in the fintech industry with tier one and tier two banks in Latin America. And I always say that if people knew what happened behind the scenes, they wouldn't trust their money to the bank. It's also if people knew what kind of emergencies an airline pilot has on the air, they wouldn't step on a plane. So I did understand the fiat money from inside, the rehypothecation of the money, the fractional reserve system. I understand that perfectly. And as I dove deeper into that, I understood also that Bitcoin comes here to revolutionize and change the whole monetary system. So that's when I actually dove in, went through the rabbit hole at 2019, more or less. Before that, and I guess many people have done this, I was speculating with Bitcoin. I was following the price action. I was buying low, selling high, buying and selling, buying and selling. Of course, shouldn't be doing that. When you understand sound money, you buy Bitcoin and hold it forever.
Can you give us a little bit more spicy, takes about your experience in the banks? You said you saw like fractional reserve in action. Like, what does it mean exactly? Uh,
Yeah, so
just curious.
so basically we all know that banks don't have the reserves that they lend to the public, right? And we understood pretty easily that they also have big operational risks. So when you understand that they don't have enough money and they also pair that with big operational risks, meaning their systems are often not well backed up, not well maintained, not well managed by teams, they do find a lot of loopholes and bugs. And if people were careful enough to have their money completely supervised or under scrutiny, they would never leave their money in banks. And, I'm not allowed to disclose any actual brands, but I can tell you that I've seen this all over Latin America with top tier one and two banks in Mexico, all the way down from to Chile. So I've seen it, man. It's not happy. It's not pretty.
Is there any difference between different Latin American countries? We kind of discussed it like privately. You said the Mexican banks are kind of worse than the other ones. Are they all in the same kind of basket, or have you seen like some countries having worse practices than others?
I wouldn't say generalize across the board. What I've seen is that the banks I dealt with in Mexico are very big, are high scale, and very popular. As I said, I'm not allowed to disclose any brands or names, but they do have a lot of systems, a lot of bureaucracy inside. There is mismatch and lack of internal communication, and that all that derives into more risk, more operational risk, more architectural risk, more legal risk. And obviously, that turns into financial risk. As for differences in countries, I would say that Latin America, although we speak the same language, Spanish, we do have stark cultural differences between these cultures, right? Between these countries. So I would say that there's some countries, and once again, I don't want to offend anyone, that are a little bit more on point, maybe a little bit more strict and rigid when it comes to handling risk than other countries in the region. I'll talk about the countries that I admire the most because of their strictness or their regulatory more strict rules that they follow. I would say that Chile is maybe one of the best around.
Yeah, I think Chile has this reputation, right, of being, they have, I think, one of the highest GDP per capita in LatAm, and they always kind of been separate from, also in the international perspective. Chileans have like better benefits with their passports, like visa-free travel to the US. I'm guessing it might be part of that culture, or I don't know. Also, maybe historical reasons. Do you have any
Yes.
insights?
Yes, I'm not Chilean myself. As I said, I'm Colombian, but I know a little bit about Chile. Chile was heavily influenced by German migration. So there's a lot of German culture within Chile's natural culture. So they try to follow the rules. They're very strict, they're very process oriented, and a little bit less lenient than other countries in Latin America. So if you have ever worked with Germans, I guess you have, you know how they're precise, how they're meticulous, how they are process oriented and quality oriented. And I think a little bit of that has Chile also.
Did you start being a Bitcoiner while you were still working at the banks? And did you try to introduce like this idea of Bitcoin while you were working, or that was completely after that you became a Bitcoiner? What was the process?
So I got acquainted with Bitcoin and I started with Bitcoin before I actually worked with banks. As I said, I wasn't into the Bitcoin maximalism yet. When I started working with banks, then I turned into understanding what money actually is and how it is managed and the monetary financial system, how it works. And that's where I reinforced my belief in Bitcoin, right? And as trying to induce anyone at the bank, I could say that even my fellow colleagues who are not bankers, we worked in a company that offered digital banking services for these banks. Some of them didn't quite understood Bitcoin. Some of them did, but most of them didn't, which was kind of a difficult thing to see, right? Because you could see what was wrong in the system, yet you still played the ball with the system. And as far as moving heavily into influencing people at the bank, I didn't do so. It wasn't in the scope of my work to do so. I did obviously spoke about Bitcoin in informal or more social gatherings or spaces where no professional things were actually dealt with. And I could see that some of them were interested in it, but they were not exposed or heavily promoted Bitcoin at all.
Understood. I think at some point they will have like no choice just to adopt it. And there's a big lack of expertise, I guess, of people speaking directly with them at the moment. Do you also see this coming, like a bigger adoption of Bitcoin by banks just because they're forced through market adoption by it?
Yes, I've seen that. And in a practical case, I saw that in El Salvador. So, as you know, Mashek, legal tender was adopted in Bitcoin. Bitcoin as legal tender was adopted in El Salvador, and it was dropped at the beginning of last year. But banks, and there were specifically two banks in El Salvador that are Colombian originated. So the brand is originally Colombian and they had subsidiaries in El Salvador. They were exposed because it was obligatory or it was mandatory to include it in the balance sheet and have operations in Bitcoin. So they did learn on how to manage these kinds of financial businesses in Bitcoin. And at least I know one of them came back to Colombia and it didn't include it as part of the operation, but they do have a spin-off, which is kind of a wallet, not really a wallet, but it is a wallet that has been spin-off and is backed by the bank. Although it has no direct operation sharing with the bank, it's still backed and supported by the bank. So I can see the shift is coming and I can see why El Salvador was very helpful in promoting these type of change and adoption within Colombian banks.
Yeah, so I've heard many stuff about El Salvador trying to introduce Bitcoin for everyone, and obviously, as being the first one, you can definitely predict that there are gonna be some challenges and problems. And since you kind of followed that, I guess, or you were involved, and it's a small country. Do you have any lessons? Like, if, for example, another country like Colombia would like to introduce Bitcoin on a more wider scale, like what will be the lessons you draw from El Salvador and the failures that happens there, and also the successes? How would you do it differently?
Well, you see, El Salvador has been doing something that I find very disruptive, and it's a government actively promoting Bitcoin adoption within its population. And one thing that I noticed is that they tried to push forward a wallet that didn't work correctly at the beginning. So that was one of the mishaps. I'm talking about the Chivo wallet. I think it was because of the scale that they wanted. I think that should have been tested beforehand at scale, and then it should have been paired with more education. So what people did is they received their Bitcoin and they immediately passed it into dollars, took an off ramp, and didn't have a chance of actually understanding it. So what I would have done basically would have been to maybe suggest that people should learn about this before spending it. So if you align incentives, you should go through, for example, a very short course on what Bitcoin is and the kind of technology and the kind of use cases it would serve before actually going into an off ramp. That's one thing that I would suggest. If I had, in hindsight, everything looks easy, of course. But if I would do that, if I would do it again, I would promote, yes, giving away Bitcoin. That was perfect because I think that's one of the easiest ways to promote adoption. But in order to pull it off the system or exchange it for dollars, I would require people to understand and study Bitcoin beforehand. There were other operational errors which had to do with arbitrage, and yeah, the Bitcoin price wasn't updated at fast enough pace, so that provided for some glitches when they were trying to exchange money, and obviously many people also took advantage of that, which I've done better. But at the same time, I do believe that what El Salvador is doing is the way to go because I think that El Salvador is moving in both ways. It's promoting Bitcoin from the top down, making it part of policy, of a public policy, right? Moving it as a national strategy. And it's also working from the bottom up, promoting circular economies, promoting education at scale, promoting that people use it as a medium of exchange. So I think it's that dual approach is one thing that I cherish, I recognize, I admire, and I would definitely promote it if we would be to do it again in some other country.
But don't you think, like, I understand, like, pushing Bitcoin from a legislative point of view and encouraging companies to adopt it and also do a strategic reserve for the country. But in terms of like the technicalities of it, like having a national wallet do you think it's really the right solution, or that should have been left to like the free market, the companies trying to act, because the states doesn't have the same incentives of being efficient, right? Even if it's the best government in the world, people, bureaucrats or whatever, don't necessarily will hire the best people. And that's maybe why, the Chivo wallet was a failure, at least in the beginning. Don't you think maybe the right solution, if another country will have to do it again, will be to leave it to the free market? Like, what's your opinion on?
I've worked for the government also, so I kind of understand where government or how governments think about these kinds of processes when you're trying at scale. First of all, you need to be at least on paper balanced, right? It means that every partner, for example, wallet partner, needs to be treated the same. But at the same time, if you have many of those partners or wallet partners, since you have this educational objective also, it will be very, very difficult to balance out and be very equal as to how to promote this with the actual wallets. So what I've done before, I would, yes, maybe figure out what would be the framework, very clear and very well thought of framework, both in technical, operational, legal, and financial framework for all these participants. And I would vet upon them. And one thing that El Salvador has learned very quickly is to provide a legal and operational framework that is best in class. They did that with Ley de Emisión de Activos Digitales, the digital asset law, which came into fruition a couple of years ago. They are very good at establishing the framework. So I would have done the same with the operational framework to deliver that those $30 or whatever it was in Bitcoin back in the day when Chivo wallet flopped.
Yeah, Aureo is actually using the Bitcoin provider license in order to provide our exchange services here in Mexico. So it's definitely a strategy that has been working for us at least and probably has been adopted by other companies. Do you have any insights on that? Like, are people using it increasingly or?
I think yes. So we are thinking about incorporating ourselves and getting a license from El Salvador because we have been all over the world trying to find out what would be the best jurisdiction, and we considered a couple of jurisdictions in the Caribbean, couple of jurisdictions in the United Arab in the GCC, particularly the United Arab Emirates, some in Europe and El Salvador, and also in Argentina. So what we figured out that the best jurisdiction, because of their forward thinking and the easiness and very straightforward regulatory framework, was El Salvador. Plus, it is also faster and cheaper. So I think El Salvador is pioneering in that sense, and they have the best, what I've seen, the best regulatory framework there is in the world for digital assets and, of course, Bitcoin. Yes.
So when you say we, I imagine it's you, it's your consultancy services. Can you basically do your pitch about what you're doing and who's the target market? Who are your clients? What are you going after? What's your mission?
Yes. So we are building an all inclusive app that code name is Biterba right now. We want to go to the bottom of the pyramid. We want to enable Bitcoin payments, but we want to go beyond that. We want, of course, to do a more natural thing wallets do, buying Bitcoin, preserving and saving it in a non-custodial way, but also providing yield and collateralized loans for it. So it's buying, preserving it, payments with it, using it as a wallet, I mean, using Lightning, of course, then having yield and collateralized loans. And also, what we want to include is this special component that will provide for challenges or rewards. So instead of big companies or big brands making big expenditures, for example, in advertising, they could pay their users for whatever challenge or reward they want. For example, watching a video, referring a friend, answering a survey, or completing any other type of challenge that they want. So we're going to be doing this within a framework that is mobile first, easy to use, with educational context, because we need to educate people about Bitcoin and some things that maybe some maxis are not going to feel too sure about this. We understand that adopting Bitcoin needs to go also through a bridge, in this case, stable coins. So we're planning to include also a state American digital dollar, still debating if it's going to be USDT or USDC. Most likely it's going to be Tethers because Tether is dominant in Latin America. And all this has to be really simple with a really easy to use UX and a really easy to use user interface that would enable them to solve problems at the bottom of the pyramid very easily with this wallet.
So are you actually building this right now? Did you receive any fundings? Are you seeking any resources? Do you have developers? What's your timeline in
Yes, we
regards of
do have
that?
a couple of developers. We do have an MVP. We're planning on delivering this in a farmers market in the next couple of months. We're looking for grants. We did apply to a couple of them. We want to build a circular economy in the farmers market, and we know that big money is not there, but we feel that adoption needs to go that way for the people who most deserve it, and that's underprivileged, unbanked, non-educated, not technical people.
And I'm guessing since you're going to include on and off ramps, you're going to start this in Colombia, or the goal is to go like international right away? What's your timeline in regards of launching this?
We're going to do it very, very local. We do have an MVP that still needs to be tested out. We're going to be doing it in a farmer's market with target market of 400 merchants. It's not very big, but we want to prove our point that we can still move money around, and that people can understand the Bitcoin concept, all the benefits. And yes, we're going to be using some off ramps also, because people need to see that this is more than a number in a mobile app. Because people feel like, if I send you some, if I send you some sats, they will see it, but they won't actually feel it unless they can turn it into fiat money and buy things with it, like actual making it money. That's the moment of truth, when people feel that Bitcoin can be turned into real money and they can buy eggs, milk, bread, whatever they need, right? So that's what we want to do. We don't want to make it the most important feature, but we recognize that it's necessary that people understand that it is actual money and medium of exchange so they can find the benefits of it.
Yeah, here at La Casa de Satoshi, we did like a Christmas bazaar market, and we told that to every merchant. Some of them were completely new to Bitcoin, and we told them like, hey, by the way, if at the end of the bazaar you want to exchange them for pesos, no problem. You can go through Aureo. And but luckily a lot of them didn't, so they learned like to hodl Bitcoin. But that was in December, so the price dropped quite a lot. So it's not necessarily the best moment, but obviously it takes a little bit of time before people actually become Bitcoiners and holders. Just curious, so without necessarily revealing your secrets and your main differentiator, like what other wallets or what other, there is Blink, there's Wallet of Satoshi, there's many wallets out there. What is missing, do you think, for them to actually resolve the problems you want to resolve in your community, in the farmers market where you're going to start all of this?
Yeah, some of these wallets that you have mentioned, they are very good, for example, at UX, like simple UX, like Wallet of Satoshi or Moon, but others are too complex and sophisticated. And what lacks Wallet of Satoshi is the other things, like, for example, doing a DCA or doing savings or program savings. They're not very good at that. They're not very good at off ramps either, right? And they're not very good at contextual education, because I think that you need to educate people as they are using the app, and not letting them like watch long videos or read books or anything like that. Just very short snippets of video, like TikToks or Instagram oriented formats, where you can learn easily about how to save money, why money is broken, how to get a remittance, how to avoid excessive fees and transactional fees or taxes, stuff like that, that are very practical, Magic. So I think that all these wallets that you have mentioned lack the actual understanding of the local environment and the local problems that people have, everyday people have. And as to your point, merchants receiving money, their business is different from other people, right? Merchants need to receive money as income, but they also need to pay. So they all have a very strong activity, not only on receiving, but paying. Their cash flow is very active and dynamic. So that's why you need off ramps also, because most of the providers are still being paid in fiat money, unless you can teach them to teach the other people in order for the network effect to actually compound.
Understand. One issue I see with like pushing merchants to adopt Bitcoin is like kind of the chicken and egg problem. Is that in order for people to accept Bitcoin, you need people to pay in Bitcoin. So I know, for example, that in Costa Rica, the Bitcoin Jungle project, they had a bunch of expats and Bitcoiners living already in certain communities. So they already had like this demand of people wanting to pay in Bitcoin. So that was kind of easy for merchants to just tell them, just install this wallet. Some people will come and will pay you in Bitcoin. You'll be happy to have more clients. But in your specific community, do you think that's something that already exists, or you have to create it out of nowhere, right? I always see that challenge of like you need people to spend their Bitcoin, and generally the Bitcoiners are always saying you should hodl, you shouldn't spend. So there's like this constant battle of people saying, oh, you should use Bitcoin as money. Other people say that you should use it as savings only. So how do you solve that in your specific case?
So I guess narrative has been that it first has to become a store of value and then a medium of exchange, and eventually it will turn into a unit of account, right? That's the actual or the most common way to position the narrative of how Bitcoin is going to be adapted as a new kind of money. We want to move further into a second stage because we believe in what Satoshi originally said, right? It is a peer to peer electronic cash system. So it means that it actually needs to be moved around because if people hoard it, you won't feel it as money. You would feel it as another asset, not money. So we feel like it needs to be transacted and it needs to be moved around. But as you said, there is quite a challenge there because if you don't have a liquidity source, like for example, Bitcoin Beach did at its time, remember it was pandemia. They received an unknown or undisclosed donor sent out money to Mike Peterson, and then he dispersed all this money into a community that had no access to real money, and it was demand driven, right? Because the people who had money were the people who were paid by Mike. So stores and other merchants were forced to receive this new kind of money because the people who were really willing to spend it were receiving it directly from the source. So in our particular case, what we have done or what we think is going to be working, not because we have done it, is we have chosen this particular farmers market that is a touristy spot also. So the way that we're framing it is that tourists, hopefully many Bitcoiners, will come in and we'll have another payment method. If we position ourselves as another payment method and we build curiosity around this and how this liquidity source can drive Bitcoin into the farmers market, we believe that we will facilitate the turning around of a circular economy. It is a hypothesis given, but we still want to make it and give it a try. We don't know how it's going to be turning out. Most likely, what will happen is that people will receive it, and some will study Bitcoin and will go to the rabbit hole, but most of them will most likely receive it. And as I said, you still need to pay providers, turn it into fiat money, and pass it on. So we'll see what happens.
And it's in Cali or it's another part of the Colombia?
Yes, it's in Cali. So we have a two-phase program because the other use case that we think is going to be working is also in isolated communities, which have other use cases and other problems. But let me go first with the first stage. It's in the farmers market. We want to see how underprivileged, uneducated people, some of them very literate when it comes to IT, will handle it. And we will learn from it in a controlled environment in Cali, Colombia, which is the most important farmers market that we have here, right? It moves billions of Colombian pesos a year. So it is a vibrant market. So we think it's going to be a very good test ground. But then we want to move it to isolated communities in the Pacific coast of Colombia, where the problem is that fiat cash, is expensive and unsafe to hold. So what we want is just to create and see if it works, circular economy where money is also being dispersed by collecting wash off plastic from the shore. So yes. So we're going to be building a circular economy not only with Bitcoin and money, but also with plastic that has to be recycled into, for example, artisanal crafts and stuff that is going to be made by the local communities. We have seen that in the past. We have tested that in the past with the foundation my brother has. He is very well versed and he has worked 35 years in these communities. So we think that we can pair both Bitcoin and the recycling into these communities. And because it's isolated, we feel like it's not going to be leaking out of the community. So that's another thesis that we're going to be trying to prove at this experiment.
It sounds quite ambitious. Do you have is there already like a network of Bitcoiners in Colombia willing to start this kind of project and help? I'm just curious about the general ecosystem in Colombia. Is there meetups in Medellin and in Cali? Like what can a Bitcoiner expect going to Colombia if he wants to meet other Bitcoiners? And what are the projects?
Very interesting. So we don't have a very big Bitcoiner community in the public because we come from this situation and, sorry to talk about this, but in the past, Colombia was, let's say, challenged when it came to security and safety, right? So people are very much shielded and they want to keep very private as to their money or their holdings or whatever, riches that they may have because they were victims of extortion or kidnapping or stuff that it's not prevalent nowadays. It's as bad as anywhere else in the world. I say sometimes it's even better than some other places in the world, but it's still something that it's keep on going with the people. So people tend to be reserved as to their holdings and their activities on money. And we do have a community in Medellin, which is, I guess, the most outspoken community in Medellin. There are a couple of colleagues that are working really hard on creating this circular economies there. And of course, in Bogota also. In Cali is still a small community, but it is growing and we hope it will, with our efforts, be much more public. So to answer your question in short, there are Bitcoiners, but they're not very public and they don't want to meet that much. It's all in their isolated spaces and being a little bit more privacy, which is also part of the Bitcoin ethos, right? So yeah, you can understand this.
Yeah, I guess in Mexico it's a little bit similar, but at the same time it's a bit different depending on the city, obviously. But for example, in Mexico City, it's quite a safe city despite being in the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous countries in the world. And what we do is kind of to portray more of a nerdy kind of vibes rather than saying there's a lot of Bitcoin there, right? So I guess there's some ways to limit, well, to be more secure, but I definitely understand the challenges that it can represent. So it's interesting to see how these kind of communities can evolve in such a context. But yeah, thank you for sharing for that.
Yeah, and I also want to share that we do have a Bitcoin only conference in Medellin. It happened in this last January. It is second edition, and interesting enough, well-known personalities in the Bitcoin ecosystem come to Colombia and they deliver these talks and they deliver their understanding and obviously debate on Bitcoin. And it's English only also. Well, there's a little bit Spanish, but most of the speakers and the participants are English speakers. So if you want, you're all invited. I hope that the organizers are going to be thinking up a third edition of Bitcoin Medellin conference to come over and have the opportunity to meet us like local Bitcoiners also.
That would be awesome. Make a Mexican Colombian connection. I already have some friends that went to. There was a conference recently. I don't think it was only Bitcoin only, but you probably know Lorena, Andres BTC.
Yes.
Quite a lot of Mexican Bitcoiners went. So yeah, I'll be
That was last
definitely.
September. It was crypto and blockchain also. What the one I'm talking about was Bitcoin only
Okay,
last January. Yeah, like a month ago.
nice. So you also say you're a Bitcoin mentor. So apart from your projects, do you also consult with companies or individuals? Do you try to push like Bitcoin adoption in other ways apart from your projects? And do you have any comments regarding how has been the reception so far in different
Yes.
areas of you know?
Yes. So I'm also a Bitcoin mentor. So I help out the high net worth individuals, family offices, and companies to include Bitcoin in their treasuries or as part of their asset preservation strategy or even intergenerational preservation strategy for their kids and the inheritance plan. So I do that also. What I feel like, and mostly you'll see this, is that there's this big universe of curious people around Bitcoin, but most of them don't really know how to make it actionable. They don't know how to buy their first Bitcoin. They don't know what a cold wallet is. They don't know how to actually, take advantage if they need a collateralized loan or if they need liquidity, how to not sell their Bitcoin, but take out some loans using it as a collateral. So what I do is help out these people, right? And I've seen growing interest over the years doing so. And they're also, and interesting enough, they're also interested in stable coins and they're also interested in tokenized gold.
Interesting. But how do like from your experience, well, living in Colombia and talking with high net worth individuals in Colombia, how do they build their wealth portfolio? Do they like to invest outside of the country? Do they like to invest in real estate? And do you kind of adapt your Bitcoin speech according to that, to like the culture? How do they manage their money, or like what's your strategy there?
Yes. So there was this narrative. I won't say it's true. Yeah, I don't want to go there, but there's this narrative of political upheaval in Colombia for the last couple of years. So to give context to your audience, we do have a left-wing leaning government. The president was elected 3 years. This is his last year. We have 4-year presidential period. And of course, there was a lot of worrisome, maybe anxiety because of the change of the political spectrum. And some of them, high net worth individuals, were falling for this of I need to protect my assets and I need to keep them away from the government's view. Some of them, yeah, made investments in foreign companies or in foreign treasury funds, or they just outwardly went to other jurisdictions to take off some of their assets. And some of them, they want them to be a little bit more private, right? And they want to be a little bit more let's put it this way, flying under the radar, right? So that's one narrative that has been moving for the last couple of years that also promotes people into going for stable coins and for gold and other hard assets. And as far as real estate is concerned, for example, you spoke about this or you mentioned it. We are a traditional country, right? It's not very sophisticated, like capital markets kind of dynamics here. What we do is we invest in hard assets, meaning real estate, for example. And when, the new government came in, some of those assets were liquidated and they were taken off the grid or off the radar into more, yeah, financial assets in other kinds of capital markets, particularly in the US or Europe.
I see really a lot of parallels with Colombia and Mexico at the moment, because there's also a left leaning government here that has been in power over the past 10 years. And as you said, there is some sort of narratives always that are being built by the opposition, people saying like your country's going to turn like to Venezuela. I'm not here to say if it's true or not, but I really see like a resemblance in that regard with Colombia here in Mexico. But do you see like generally are people satisfied, or because a lot of countries in Latin America have been switching to the right side of the politics, with Bukele, other countries. Do you see this happening also in Colombia, or people generally satisfied with the current government?
No, it could happen. It could happen. People are not, well, depends on who you ask, right? But if you ask people who are in charge of companies and being productive means, like people who have the wealth and the income and people who can invest in the country, they don't have a positive opinion on this. Their opinion is more negative. Now, if you ask the lower income bands in the country and the population that doesn't have that much of a wage or a high income, then they favor the government because, for example, the government increased the minimum wage in 23%, whereas inflation increased around 6%. So it's a fourfold appreciation on the minimum wage. And of course, we know that that will also have an impact on inflation that they won't understand or that they won't feel until, I don't know, 6, 7, or 12 months in the future, which, by the way, is enough time to get into the new government. So here's where you see that government policy, for example, influencing or decreasing minimum wage has a direct impact on electoral processes. So it will be most likely that the election will be framed around continuism, or left will help the people, or a left leaning government or next government will help you as we did. So you might as well re-elect the same party, which we all know is not the best thing to do because you are inflating, once again, you are demoting or debasing the local currency and everything will go up. But the effects will only be felt after the election. And that's how politicians also manipulate money or minimum wage in order to stay in power.
Yes,
And by
definitely. Yeah,
taking any political stand on this, right? This is only technical, and this is what I've seen. I don't have a particular opinion on ideology. No.
understand. Actually, in Mexico, it's exactly the same. They increased but way more drastically. I think in the span of 10 years, less than 10 years, they increased the minimum salary like 300%. But to be fair, like without again giving any opinion about one ideology or the other, the minimum salary was like 80 pesos a day, which was it's like $4, and decrease it to around $300. And the big part of the economy is still really informal, probably more than half. So you always have to influence everything. But yeah, it's interesting to see that the similarities that have been happening. But apart from that, how is it? Is it easy from a legal and point of view to open a Bitcoin company or a fintech company in Colombia? Like, are the companies getting support, or there's a lot of bureaucracy? Like, what is the process to open a company or startup in Colombia?
Yeah, so opening is not a problem. I think it's one of the countries that you can open a company easy and fast. It's faster than Mexico, and I can say this because I've gone through the hurdles of opening a company in Mexico. It's easier, faster, cheaper, straightforward. It's more transparent than it is in Mexico. So you can open a company here in 1 week or 2 weeks. It's not a problem. Now, when it comes to taxes, you won't find incentives for newly formed companies. You'll have the same taxes for all companies. So it is quite hefty and difficult to start a company because you don't find incentives for startups or entrepreneurs in general, right? It is quite difficult. And as for capital markets and finding funding for those, you do have a couple of some government led, some institutional, privately led that will support the companies, but it's very difficult to find angel investments or funding rounds, right? It is very difficult. So, to answer your question, I think it is very challenging not to open the company and operate the company, but to keep afloat with the company for 2, 3, or 4 years. So, the mortality rate is really high. You still think that it is a chance to, do it. I guess it's also as in Mexico, most of the companies are micro or small business or small or medium sized businesses. It's like 95% of the workforce works or is employed by or is an entrepreneur. And the big companies are obviously like very, very small number, maybe 10,000 or so.
Well, if somebody is listening and wants more advice, you can contact Gabriel in that regards. Yeah, I think I asked all my questions. Did I miss anything that is interesting from your point of view that I didn't?
I would love to hear your opinion on Latin America because you have been around for a little bit. You have lived in Mexico for a while. You have visited El Salvador, and I guess you've been places. What is your general opinion of the culture, business wise, and the opportunity for Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I moved to Mexico around 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I think there's always like lune de miel, basically like a period of time where you think that you just landed in paradise. Everything looks great. So
Yeah,
that
honeymoon.
maybe the honeymoon. Yes, exactly. Sorry. So that lasts more or less, 6 months, 1 year. But I still got in love with the country, with the culture, with the LatAm culture in general. My girlfriend is Mexican, so that's also a big part of it. But once I landed here, I really felt like more free, and that's what I liked about it. But as the year passed, that's when you kind of see the challenges, bureaucracy, the other bad sides of LatAm, especially for example in Mexico, security wise is not the best. So you learn to adapt, and but I also see them as opportunities. If you love a country and this country has adopted you as it's a new resident, and Mexicans have always been super welcoming to me. Apart from on X, sometimes you have some people saying you should go back to your country, but I guess this is normal. But outside of that, Mexicans always have been welcoming. So if you want to integrate in a country, you should definitely, learn the language and also participate in making it better. And now that I have a company in Mexico and eventually the goal is to expand to other LatAm countries, my goal is to kind of solve some of these problems I'm seeing. So I can definitely say it's way harder to do business here. The bureaucracy, all the licenses, everything you need to do is really cumbersome. And I think it makes it really harder for someone to start a company, especially if you don't have extra funds or time to dedicate for that. It's basically almost impossible for someone to start a successful startup and raise funds. So me and my partners have been really lucky with this. And what's frustrating is that the rules, the KYC rules, the IML rules apply for the small companies, and we have to follow them really well. If not, we get shut down. But as we know, corruption and crimes in the higher circles are permitted, right? So this is really frustrating, but we're gonna push through it and try to offer the best services and try to make the country better. But it's definitely a challenging thing as somebody that is a foreigner. So I do feel welcome here, but yeah, I'm constantly learning every day about the culture, about the way things are done, how people work. That's also another thing, because in Canada you're used to a certain type of work. I mean, I could talk about this for a longer time, but that's kind of the shorter version. Definitely a challenging thing, but it's fun. Like life is about challenges and not having the easy life.
Yes, I do relate with you, not only as a Latin American, but also as a Colombian and as a dear lover of the Mexican culture. I've been in Mexico many times. I know my way around. I did business in Mexico, as I said, and I think you're absolutely right. And I want to publicly thank you and your partners for trusting and wanting to do business in Latin America because we do need help. We do need when I say help, is not the help that comes over with this patronizing, not at all. What I'm saying is help, meaning like new blood, new thought, new ideas, new ways of doing stuff, and a new vision of the world, right? Because sometimes we are too stuck in our habits, in our culture, in our way of doing things. So thank you so much, Maciek, you and your partners, and Aurel, of course, for coming over.
I mean, the reciprocity is there, right? It's like you welcome us, and I kind of actually my CEO and my partner, that is the main co-founder. He's Peruvian, but he also lived in Canada his whole life, so he's a little bit closer to that. But since he lived in Canada basically his whole adult life, he still has to adapt. So that's really funny to observe. But yeah, thank you, and the pleasure is ours to be experimenting with this. We never would have thought maybe 5 years ago that we will be raising pre-seed money with American money and making a company in Mexico. Kind of a crazy story, but you want to give back and give opportunities to your new home, right? I think it's normal. But
You will,
sorry.
you'll make it good. You will thrive, and you're gonna be good. You're gonna be
I hope
successful.
so. I hope so because we're working definitely really hard. And that's why also I'm doing this podcast is basically I've looked it up and there's basically no people are always saying like oh there's not enough Spanish content and I agree. We also working on bringing more Spanish content and tools. For example, we launched like a tool called inflacionmexico.com. It lets you calculate like the loss of your purchasing power of the pesos based on the official data of the Bank of Mexico. So we're building stuff like that. But what I saw also is that what was missing, kind of in terms of education, is English content about what's happening in LATAM. Because there, so I basically seized the opportunity of like being this guy that interviews all the founders, all the Bitcoiners, working really hard, working on companies, working on projects, working on circular economies all over LatAm, and trying to understand their challenges, the opportunities. So I hope more and more people will listen to the podcast. But yeah, it's a matter of persistency. And thank you for joining, of course.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope for the best, Maciek, for you and Aureo.
So I guess we're kind of done. So how can people follow your projects? You have a big following on LinkedIn, so you post a lot there. You post a lot on X. So maybe if you can just give a perspective on where to find you, if people want
Yes.
to contact you.
Yes, if you can follow me on X, on Instagram, pretty active there. This is my handler, like here. I don't know if you can see it.
I will add it in the description.
Okay. So that's my handler. And yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to connect with not only Bitcoiners, but anyone who wants to learn about Bitcoin and who wants also to drive transformation, because that's what I'm actually working on changing the world, right? Us Bitcoiners, we think if we change the money, we change the world. And I definitely think that. But I also think that the best way to change the world is to change ourselves first. So I make an effort to change, and I try to help people to transform themselves from different angles, right? Financially is one of those. But I'm here to help out also startup ventures or people who want to soft land or help out in Latin America. I'm here also to help out. So once again, Maciek, thank you so much and appreciate your time and attention and your energy, of course.
Thank you so much as well. That was a pleasure.